Well, it looks like we're live. So we'll get started in just a second. I want to invite everyone to join us for Dark Corners and Bright Lights. This is our first ever online Q&A session through Louder Than 10, and we're really excited about it. We have some great guests today, great partners I'd also like to add, and we want to invite you to make sure that you use the Q&A add-on if you get a chance through Google Hangouts on Air and submit your questions. So you can find us at louderthan10.com or check out our Twitter or Facebook pages if you like that kind of thing. And you'll also notice that after the event is over, you will also be able to check it out on our YouTube channel at Louder Than 10. Surprise, surprise. So Louder Than 10 is the school for creative people who run projects, and I wanted to add that we're building a community of digital project managers, freelancers, studio owners, and we're trying to do that through using workshops, events, and resources that bring everybody together. And the thing is, though, is we need your help. We can't do this on our own, and it's about damn time because you know what? We're good people, all of us, so let's stick together. So I'd like to introduce you guys to two of my favorite gentlemen. They are also digital project management consultants, which for short is DPM, Carson Pierce and Robert Jolly. And I want to send it over to them to wow you with their introductions. I also want to make sure that I introduce my partner, and he's also my better half, much better half, Travis Gertz. He's in the wings. He's doing all of the tech support today, but he also helps us. Okay, he totally does all of the work for our site. So he's going to keep this ship sailing straight, keep me on time, and make sure that we do a great job today. So without further ado, tell us a little bit about yourself, Robert Jolly.
So I am a project manager that I guess I can say I have about 15 plus years of experience in running and managing projects. I've done design work, development work. I've written copy. I've done QA. So I've kind of held a lot of different positions that I end up needing to know about as a digital project manager. So so that's a little bit of my very vague history. I've had the opportunity to work on some very big projects over the years, and some even this year that have been a lot of fun and have involved a lot of learning and a lot of kind of challenging timelines and also working with great people. But it's not all big projects. I've also worked with a lot of startups and nonprofits and small businesses along the way. So did that answer your question? Who I am?
Yes. Yes, you're like the one-man bandstand, and I don't know if they can throw the word stand in, but I just did, so there you are.
Awesome.
And on my left, which I don't know if that's your left, but we have Carson Pierce, who I'd also like to tell you that he's going to be joining us to help with a lot of process and workflow management and consulting through Louder Than 10. So kind of excited. Sorry, I kind of took away the bluster, so you can now do that yourself, Carson. Feel free to jump in.
I'll go back in time instead. So I started off working for a print company that was just starting digital, and so I was doing everything that involved the web at that point for them, mostly on the programming side. So I started there. After that, I started my own company. It grew to the point where I realized I wasn't the best person to be doing a lot of this stuff, so I ended up sliding into a project management role. That company got bought out by another company where I worked for the last few years. Started off doing project management, moved into a role more of overseeing project management there and building up their project management office. And you talked about developing process and stuff. That's kind of what I did there is figuring out how we're going to do our work. Just recently left that job to go start working at Louder Than 10 and helping other clients figure out how they're going to do stuff as well.
It's your funeral.
It's a risk I'm willing to take.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for helping us out, Carson. We're super excited. So I will do a quick intro for myself. This is not about me today. This is about these guys. But I'm Rachel Gertz. I've been working with Louder Than 10 for probably a decade. We started out as an engraving shop, and then we went to a digital studio format. I was there to vacuum the floors on Fridays, and then gradually took on a content role with my husband, I should mention. And then and then from there, we started actually taking the show on the road. So we sold everything we owned. We bought an RV that was 31 feet, longest vehicle I've ever driven. And we headed out on down the coast and traveled for about 9 months on the road and did some freelance work from there. So we took it back home. We're like, what are we doing? We should be on the coast again. And so from there, we just decided that first of all, we love project managers. We love everything they stand for because, I mean, they work their asses off. You know what? They get it from both ends, and we want to support them, and we want to build a community around them. So I'm here today to start that conversation, and I know that it's not just me. It's been lots of other folks, and I wanted to mention too that my start actually probably happened as a result of the Digital Project Management Summit, and I really want to throw a huge shout out to all of those guys, especially Brett, for all of the coordination and the work that they've done, because I don't think it hit me till I was up on stage at that event last year when I realized that we really need to work together. We can't let anything stand in our way, and we have to support each other. So thank you guys, and thank all of you for coming here and being part of this today. So I wanted to give you guys a breakdown of our format. I'm going to guide the conversation, and it's not going to be, again, about me. It's going to be about just working through some of the light and dark spots that we run into as project managers. And if you know anything about project management, we're all project managers. We're dealing with people, and we're dealing with projects. Therefore, project management. So I'll guide the conversation with some meaty questions. We'll do that for about 45 to 50 minutes, and then I do want to open it up to you, our audience, to actually start asking some questions. And feel free, ask your deepest, darkest fears. Like, we are not here to do this alone. Nobody's ever born with those answers, and you certainly don't learn them in school or in a degree or any other kind of situation. It's literally hands-on, on-the-ground work. So are we ready to go? Hey, let's do this. All right. So we know we love PMs. We know that we love studio managers, and we know we love everything in between. I want to open it up by talking a little bit about remote project management. So Robert, a few months ago, actually probably what now, 4 or 5 months ago, you and the family picked everything up and moved south from Delaware, and you went to sunny Florida. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the beaches and the heat. As a remote project manager and a digital project management consultant for some wicked projects. And if I remember correctly, even PM the new Time Inc. redesign, right? So
that's right.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about how you ended up there as a remote PM, and I want you to tell us a bit about how that impacts the kind of work that you do as well.
Okay, so for, I would say, 10 plus years of my career, I was working with co-located teams, which means just in-house teams. I worked for agencies, I worked for clients of agencies, but I always worked in an office and came to work Monday through Friday, went home, did work from home as well from time to time. But at the end of 2010, I left my full-time job at an agency in Philadelphia and decided I wanted a complete change of direction. So I went back to school and I explored that option for a while and decided that during a break that I'd do some remote project management work with some friends of mine they ran an agency, and I ended up really liking working remotely and doing project management for individuals and for projects that had a definite start and stop, and being remote and being freelance gives you a lot of freedom to have variety and to wear flip-flops every day and shorts, and only put on long pants for client meetings in person and things like that. So that's kind of why I chose to stay with being a remote project manager. Remote teams are nothing new, and they certainly have their challenges, but there are so many advantages to remote teams. And most of the agency work that I did when I was in-house and going in to be with a co-located team, almost all of our clients were out of town anyway, and we did remote work for our clients. So this is just an extension of that.
Okay, so now that you kind of have established that role as a remote PM, can you tell me, how would someone who is thinking about doing that role, how would they actually start? Like, what are some of the things they should think about?
Well, work planning is a big one. Making sure that you have a reliable schedule, that people know when and where they can reach you. It's not all working from coffee shops or the beach or wherever. I spend a lot of my time in this room during the work hours because I'm working. So having a good work ethic and being somewhat reliable and predictable about being available is one of the biggest things. So just because you can take a 9-month cross-country trip to do your work doesn't mean that that's sustainable long term, right? So just being in place to support the teams that you're working with, your client teams and your project teams is key.
Awesome.
Yeah.
To set yourself up that way, do you think it's actually pretty simple? I mean, you probably, I know there's tools you can use that allow you to go into separate, say, for example, Basecamp accounts or whatnot. Is it pretty simple to set yourself up as a remote PM?
I think it is simple. If you're using a set of tools now and you're co-located, but you want to go remote, it's usually a matter of using those same tools or a subset of those tools or similar tools to do that. So a lot of our work when I was co-located was through Basecamp and through obviously email and collaboration with file sharing and whatnot. So those tools don't change when you go remote. With Hangouts now and with different kind of internet-based or voice over IP-based conference services, Skype, you name it. I mean, if you're into WebEx or GoToMeeting still, those are viable options. It's just a matter of making sure that you're connected with your team, communicating that everybody is staying on the same page, and it is relatively easy, especially if you're already using those tools.
Right.
If you're not, if you're used to many in-person meetings where things have to get done in person, then maybe remote is not going to be easy.
Right.
It's certainly possible, but it's not an easy transition if you're really dependent on those face-to-face daily interactions.
So basically, though, I mean, if you wanted to be a remote project manager, essentially you just have to say, I'm a remote project manager, set how many hours you'd like to sort of designate total, and then break those up between your clients, and then just start marketing yourself that way. Does that seem pretty much straightforward, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are so many different variables that each person trying to do this has to take into account, but essentially that's it.
Awesome.
That's it.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into it more, but we definitely have to keep on top of our time. So I'm going to move on a little bit and talk about process and methodology. So Carson, you recently changed jobs, and you're focusing on helping agencies create new processes and design methodology. I know when people hear the word methodology, they actually start to form a little bit of drool down the side of their mouth, and I want to know, tell me, why is that not boring? Tell me why you love process and methodology so much.
I think it's not boring to me because I've seen the results of it. So on one hand, I've seen what happens when there's not that process in place. Projects that just go completely off the rails, burning, flaming wrecks, and they're 100% over budget, and everyone's going, what happened here? And you realize, looking back, oh, if we had followed a little bit of a plan, we would have been so much better off. So I've been able to see the difference that can make. And even places that have an established methodology already, being able to tweak it and make it a little bit better, to me, is just exciting. And I think that comes down to not just making the stuff that project managers do more efficient, but being able to make everyone on the team more efficient and make their work fit together better, and everyone just everything goes more smoothly.
So could you say then that you saw that firsthand, even just working on internal process changes with your own past company?
Oh, for sure. Uh, I saw how we transitioned over the course of 2 or 3 years from just sort of making it up as we go, um, until we had a pretty established methodology, and you could tell the difference dramatically from the beginning of that to the end. And not only in terms of financials, making project come in on budget and on time, but also just the feeling from the team that there was a better way of doing things. So when we started all that, there was lots of complaints about how we were doing things, how mismanaged things were, and it wasn't. I think we recognized, even the team recognized, that it was a project management issue. They didn't value project management at that time, and so the complaints I would get, or the comments I would get, would be things like, "Why do we have so many project managers? And what are you guys even doing over there?" And then by the time that we started to roll out that methodology a little bit more, the comments coming back were more like, the development team would say, "I think we need to figure out what we're doing the way that the project managers have it figured out."
Nice.
And that was a huge transition for them to be able to start seeing the value of that was huge for us.
That's awesome. So obviously you guys made it a little bit easier for people to kind of function within their roles and teams. Um, so I think moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about fear. I think the biggest thing that drives me crazy about our industry is that a lot of what we do is motivated by fear. I actually launched an article a couple days ago on Medium just about this and how I think it actually goes into all, a variety of different industries. We're not just limited to the design industry, but I find it ironic that there are so many resources out there about technical guidelines, things that we need to make sure we're looking at, even, how are we going to approach a new build, responsive, fluid grid, all of these things, and yet at the same time, we don't have sort of like a standard for helping standardize integrity across our industry, right? And if someone else is failing, we almost look at that as, oh, their loss, my gain, right? So again, I wanted to say, like, I feel like this sort of lets our clients drive the projects, and when they have the reins, obviously they feel like we're not in control, and they will drive that project. I know the DPM Summit has done a lot, again, for the industry and making people more aware of some of those PM roles, but I know there's also a lot of work to do still. So I actually, if I had a couple seconds, I wanted to tell a story. Before I was doing this, I actually graduated as a high school English teacher. So I remember standing in the room during this last month of my teaching semester, and I had to tell a student, you need to go into the hall. But my associate teacher, she had given me the most wise piece of advice ever, and she said, okay, when you get out there in the hall, this is what you do. You kneel down, you make eye level with that student, and you say to them, who needs to win this? And they're not going to have an answer because they know you need to win, and they know you need to lead that entire classroom, so you automatically get a win. And I was like, that's brilliant. But I think the fun part about that is that actually if our clients want to win, we have to be able to guide them and lead that project. So in effect, we have to win. And I think it's part of understanding that we can shift our roles as PMs and take that power back, and a lot of it is positioning ourselves and things like that. So I wanted to actually ask both you guys, I'll start with Robert, what drives you crazy about the design industry and specifically digital design? So what grinds your gears?
I think it would have to be confusion about what designers do in terms of, from clients, but also even from agencies. There are so many different approaches to design, about how we do it and why we do it, that and it ranges from, just make it pretty, to having something very thoughtful and strategic put together, and that there's a process around that. And I think communicating the maturity level of the industry in terms of developed processes and how a team would use that to help a client get from point A to point B, rather than a client just saying, why can't you just make it look pretty, or why can't we have, why can't we see the site before we tell you we're going to pay for it, or whatever it is, that tends to really, muck up people's expectations and understandings about the project work that we do.
So it's a lot about the education process, right, and how we sort of bring our clients and teams on board with us throughout that, hey?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Carson, what drives you crazy about the design industry?
I think overall we have a pretty good, like, I love working in this industry and it's a lot of fun. I think what I found, going back to last year's Digital Project Management Summit, I think what drives me crazy is we got all these really smart people working in project management on websites, and we're all just sort of making it up. Just seemed like there was whatever 150 people there last year, and as you went around talking to everyone, they're all like, "I do it this way. What do you do?" And no one really has a right answer. So I think, again, going back to your last question, is to me that's part of my passion about methodology, is like, let's figure this out. But also I think the other half of it, which has changed a lot recently, is we're not talking to each other, and so we are all just working independently, guessing at how the best way should be. So I love what I'm seeing in terms, even this event and other things that are going on right now, starting to share that information and figuring out what the best practices are.
That's awesome. Okay, so with that, part of what drives you crazy, I think that there's this sort of undertone. Sometimes you have to be a hard ass, right? Sometimes you have to sort of put your foot down. And Carson, I wanted to ask you, have you ever had to be a jerk with your team or a client, and how did that go?
Not much. I don't have a whole lot of jerkiness in me, I don't think. Maybe other people would disagree with that. But I think there's certainly a lot of cases where I should have been more of a jerk, and maybe jerk's the wrong word. Because I think there's ways to communicate things, hard conversations, without being a jerk about it. But I can certainly think of a lot of cases where I should have stepped in and said something that didn't feel comfortable, and by not doing that, it just ended up hurting more in the long term. And I think one example I can think of where I felt like a jerk was we recently had to let a project manager go, and that sucks when you get to that point of having, when it gets, you've missed out on the conversations that could have made it better, and then you have to actually let them go. It was pretty awful, but at the same time, 2 hours after that, we were out at a pub having drinks together. So I think you can have those conversations without ending up being the giant jerk.
Awesome. That's great. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention quickly too, so for anyone submitting questions, we're just going to take those at the end, the last 10 or 15 minutes. So if we're not getting to them right now, it's just we're going through a few of our questions that we've got in the process, and then we'll come right back to you. So I wanted to add that I feel like I say no all the time, and I don't know how other people see this, especially other project managers, but I feel like not only do we have to say no, it's our necessity. Like in order for us to establish control, we can say no in a nice way. So for example, I had a lovely client who came to me and asked me if we could put a giant pop-up robot on their home screen because they'd seen someone else do it and it looked awesome. And in no way was that related to their business goals. And so I told them, I said, how does this support your business goals? That conversation is pivotal, because if you find that the site goals and the requests for functionality that you're getting are not aligning with the way that they have actually dictated their business goals, something's amiss, right? Something's not lining up. So you can use that rather than just being like a hard ass and saying, no, that's a dumb idea, which is what you might be thinking. You say to them, you know what, let's go back to your business goals, and if this supports them, great. If not, let's actually brainstorm some ideas together and think about how we can approach this differently. And I find that works really well, because usually your clients get excited. It's their baby. They're trying to develop some really awesome idea. So I mean, in some ways, I guess people might say I'm a hard ass, but I feel like you can be a lovable hard ass, right? And the work that we do, I think part of that job is to put those boundaries in. And I remember hearing a story, again, another teaching story, but I remember hearing a story where they did a test and they wanted to see, would students play more freely with or without a fence? So they put a fence in, and what they found is that all the students who formerly were just playing really close to the school because they weren't sure like how far out they should go, actually went right up and played right outside by that fence. Now, in no way am I saying our clients are kids or students, but I think it's applicable in that when we set boundaries and guidelines and people know what to expect, then they're not going to come back and question, well, is it okay, or I'd like to do this, because they know there's a fence, there's the rule, that's the dotted line. So I don't know. I think it's a good idea to have boundaries and have some limitations on where we can run. So I think the next step is to move into the dark side. So we're going to have some tough conversations here, and I really want to dig into situations we've had that have been really hard. Everybody knows that usually project management can be roses. It's usually roses right at the beginning and then roses when it's over. In the middle, it can get a little dicey. And I just want to say, if you don't know how to have those tough conversations with both your clients and your teams, then that's where you can really struggle. So Robert, can you tell us how you deal with scope creep on your projects, and like what advice do you think you could offer for people who are kind of struggling just to figure out like where and when it happens?
So I think the biggest thing you can do as a project manager is stay on top of what you agreed to do with the client in the beginning, and make sure you're communicating about that in context of where we are with the scope during the project. So for example, if you have agreed to do four versions of a design, or 4 rounds of revision of a design, and then you're supposed to get into development, but the client has kind of gone back to the well, and you're at, say, revision 5 or 6, you should be talking early about, hey, this may extend either the timeline or the cost or both. Rather than wait until later in development when the client is expecting the project to be at a certain point that you're not at, to raise that issue later on. So it's I'm going to use it sounds like a cop-out. It kind of is a cop-out because I think there's a lot more to it than this, but I'm going to use this kind of repeatedly throughout all of this, is that communication is key. So communicating early and often, and making sure everybody has the same set of expectations is probably the thing that you can do to manage scope the best. It makes conversations easier when it's not the first time a client has heard of a big issue. Like if you start talking about potential issues with the direction that things are headed, and then you talk about things turning into small issues and then turning into bigger issues, then there aren't many surprises. I mean, sometimes clients are going to hear what they want to hear anyway, and also, vendor teams, for that matter, are going to hear what they want to hear, because everybody wants to have the rose-colored glasses on for as long as possible. So, I do think that, in terms of tips for spotting it, it's keeping an updated project plan going, and returning to that plan rather than just at the beginning saying, okay, this is our plan for the next 8 months for this project, and it looks great, and it's great in theory, but then, change happens. And so if you're not updating that plan to reflect the change that is occurring, then it makes things more difficult. It makes those conversations more difficult. It makes spotting the potential problems more difficult.
Definitely. I don't know if you found this for you, but I find anytime a client says blah 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 blah, but can we da 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 da? Anytime you have the words but or can we, scope creep. Immediately recognizing that and pinching that and realizing that the conversation you have to have with that client this week about that little change is going to be far less painful than that conversation you have to have with them after the fact when you've blown $20,000 worth of their budget. So I totally agree with you there. Keeping them regularly updated and recognizing that if you can make them little tiny adjustments, it's way less painful. I wanted to actually ask, Carson, do you have anything to add, like how to avoid scope creep?
I think the one thing I would add is I don't necessarily think scope creep is always bad. I think it's just an opening for a conversation. So when a client is saying, hey, can we add this extra thing, it's not a matter of saying, hey, that's not part of our project plan and it's going to mean that you're going to go over budget or whatever. It's, hey, if you're saying you want this, let's talk about what impact that has on things and how important is that to the project. Does it replace something else? Are we willing to expand the project? Whatever. So I'm never one to shut down a request for something additional, but it's just the start of a conversation. So yeah, you have to be aware of it and you have to have those conversations, but it doesn't have to be a bad conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know sometimes things that have worked in the past for when you're trying to kind of identify scope creep, if people get really excited and they want to add this, that, and the other, or if it's undefined, what you can do is try to shrink it down into a phased approach, right? So if you can find out your minimum, I know people kind of put that out as minimum viable product or whatever you want to call it, but what do you need to make this thing able to work, even if it doesn't have every bell and whistle possible, but you only have a $4,000 budget, then what can we do right now to make that work, right? I know that a few different agencies, there's probably tons that do this, but I know when I was working with EngineWorks, we would do something called like the paid discovery. So basically we would come in and we would say, okay guys, we're going to spend some time finding out and making sure that these are the goals, and how would we meet these goals? Well, let's look into that research process, and we would actually just charge a flat project rate for that. And I know that Clockwork also does that. Nancy Lyons, she's responsible for, she's mentioned sort of they have like a research plan, and then they have like the execution plan. And the research plan, you basically, it's like flat, this is how much it's going to cost. Actually, no, they estimate that. Sorry, I'm wrong. They estimate the research as well, and like how much scope they figure that's going to take. Got a few good questions coming in. I'm kind of excited about these. I want to ask Robert, we're talking about tough conversations now. So can you tell us a little bit about a tough conversation you've had to have with a client or a team member?
I just poured a drink, so I'm going to take a sip before I answer that.
This is a big one.
Please do. I was going to preface this with, I have a sore throat, bit of a sore throat today, so I decided to drink junipers for breakfast, and it seems to be helping quite a bit.
So tough conversations with clients or team members. I think I think it depends on the situation and the person, but with team members, I always want to kind of pull them aside and have a private conversation with them about a concern that I'm seeing, whether it's they're evading my questions about when a certain task will be able to be delivered, or defining the tasks themselves and getting to a specific milestone, so that it helps me communicate with the client and it helps us stay on track of things. If I feel like there's something going on like that, which does happen, where people just they want to get it done, but they don't want to plan around how it's going to get done and be realistic about it. And so it could be a number of reasons why, but pulling them aside and saying, hey, look, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to understand what you're going through, what all is on your plate, so that I can help you get this done if you need help, or if we need to communicate that the deadline needs to be pushed out a little bit, it's better to do it early than later. It basically coming at them as, hey, I'm a member of your team, but I see something going on that I think is concerning, and we don't want it to become a bigger problem. And the same thing can be done with clients, although I think with clients, it's more about, let me hear what you're going through, and let me listen and make sure that I understand it. Whether or not I agree with it or not is, those are tough conversations, and I had one recently with a client that fortunately, I didn't work on the bulk of the project, but I was brought in to kind of see it to a new direction and/or completion, and the client felt really let down, and they had to vent to me about what had happened, and I had to listen, and I had to acknowledge that's how you're feeling, and I couldn't, and it was very difficult. I couldn't get into, well, here's our side of it, and here's what I'm hearing from our team, how these things happened. It was more about, okay, let me hear what you've had to say, so you can feel like I understand where you're coming from, and then let's focus on how to make things better moving forward or how to wrap things up. And the difficult conversations, I mean, those are difficult because your goal is not to, not to end things or not to be right, but it's more of just to figure out the best way forward. The easier conversations sometimes are the shouting matches where somebody is totally disrespecting you or your team, and then you can just say, hey, that's it. You guys are crazy, and we're done. That's super easy, even though at the time you think it's like the worst thing ever. Yeah. You all know about those conversations,
yeah,
right?
We definitely know about those conversations. Thanks so much. So Carson, how do you deal with the stress then of having these kinds of tough conversations? Like, I guess, how do you think that should impact, say like a manager, a CEO in terms of their role when you're having a tough conversation with the client?
I think, I don't know if this really answers the question or not, but I think the way that I get over that hurdle of, whether you call it fear or stress or whatever, those difficult conversations, it's recognizing that it gets worse if you don't have them. And Robert kind of touched on that earlier, but we had a case on a project where we knew we were going to go over budget. We knew like 3 or 4 months out that we were going to go over budget. And I was telling the PM on the project, like, we need to have the conversation with the client now. Let them know what's going on so we can make some decisions. They can have the input that they need to decide if they were going to add more budget, we're going to trim something or whatever. But we need to have it, and we didn't have the conversation. And every month we were sending out invoices, and we weren't having that conversation until the very last one where we sent a big invoice with all the extra costs, and then we have a very difficult conversation. So recognizing that it's so much easier earlier on, even if it's a little bit difficult, it's so much better than waiting. I think that's the big thing. But in terms of CEO or like a project sponsor or something, I think there's some fear there that if you let your PMs loose to have those direct conversations with the clients, that you're going to tick off the clients, you're going to lose those clients, which is rarely the case. I think the CEOs and people in those positions need to recognize that these are healthy conversations, and we need to have them in order to keep the projects on track and not be afraid of them.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely agree with you on that one. This kind of speaks to a little bit, I've heard this called voices in the shadows. I've also heard this, well, called kind of mystery voices, but the idea that if you're dealing with clients or you're dealing with your own team, if you have a project scope, but say right from the get-go, this happens to a lot of project managers where you'll just be like handed a budget and then you got to run with that. So even though or maybe your entire team knows, maybe even the client knows that this is not, a reasonable scope for the project, you're stuck with it. So it's that breakdown of communication and sort of the role that you play as a project manager. And my personal belief is that because we're dealing with such delicate things like budgets and scope, and we have to be, clear on everything from the start to the finish, our roles should be actually brought right into that very beginning, whether we're working with, business development or, there's like an account manager, whoever we're dealing with. And so I think in a way that becomes a tough conversation, because you essentially have to stand up and say, look, I know that this might not even, align with my job title and the roles that I play in the job title, but if I don't know what's coming down the pipes, I can't help. And then you basically drive your team into the ground, and your client's like, well, what's up? And it's like, well, I saw this coming. So it's this total breakdown. And I think that's huge in our industry. It maybe doesn't happen quite as much on a small, like, independent studio, but large agencies, large ad agencies especially, that follow that more traditional model, it's like, keep your cards close and you don't share them. And I really would like to see us challenge that, because I think we have the unique ability as project managers. I mean, I can't remember, but I want to say it's like 86% of our skills that we bring to the table are soft skills, which means we're in tune with, how people are reacting, the emotions they're bringing to the table, things that are really like, you can't just learn that, you have to be emotionally intelligent. So I would be really excited to see everybody kind of come together around that. Let's see here. So, oh yeah, the other thing, have you guys ever seen how complex job descriptions are for project management? Like, have you ever kind of gone on to those job marketing sites and just
Yeah.
seen like project managers? They're almost 2 pages long, and I think it's like literally wizard magician is in there because you need to be able to do so many different things and wear so many hats. I'm shocked that they're not paying project managers at least, $150 to $200,000 because they know exactly. It's like they have to, in a way, sort of be like the gatekeeper, the board. I was going to say God. Okay, I was going to say God. But they have to fulfill a lot of these different roles. Um, so, okay, Carson, this is where we get really specific. And again, we're protecting the people we love and our clients. But at the same time, what's the worst thing that you remember about a project that went wrong? And how did you fix it?
Um, the fixing probably won't be a very satisfying answer, but the worst thing I can think of, or the worst project I can remember, is we had a project where we had an existing client on a legacy CMS that no one wanted to maintain. So we thought, we're going to move them over to this new technology. In this case, that was Drupal. So everything will be easier. It'll be great. We'll spend 3 months completely converting the site over. Easy, no problem. And then we started working on it and realized that there were a lot of issues that we didn't foresee. So rather than having those difficult conversations with the client and saying, hey, we have a problem, it's going to take longer, or just recognizing that we needed some more time to figure things out or whatever, we just sort of kept stalling and extending, and we went on and on. And long story short, we ended up a year later, I think it was almost a year later, we were still struggling and still having the same problems, and we sort of put a halt in the project and said, we need to stop and evaluate what's going on here. So we brought in some other outside people to take a look at what was going on in the status of the project. And basically the outcome of that meeting was, I don't know if it wasn't quite we need to start over, but it was very close to we need to start over on this. And finally we had that conversation with the client of saying, I don't think this is worth it for you to wait for us to continue to keep on doing it. It's certainly not worth the money. And it wasn't worth it for us to, take another stab at it. So we ended up, the fix in this case was to just say, we're going to go our separate ways, which is not terribly satisfying, but it was certainly in the best interest of both us and the client in this case. We actually have another project that went down a similar route more recently, where we did that stop on the project, reevaluate, and at that point we recognized where the problems were. We actually changed up the team a little bit. We changed the methodology completely. So we went from a sort of waterfall agile hybrid to Scrum. But being able to stop and make those changes has helped. It's not done yet, so the outcome is yet to be seen, but we certainly learned some lessons from the first time. And just tying it back into the earlier conversations, just having those tough talks with your client all along the whole thing would have made it a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that we don't necessarily know how to have those conversations internally. I mean, we're not, again, born with the words to say, but there are lots of things that you can learn. For example, if someone is ever asking for more things, you can say, that's a great idea. I think this one came from Carl Smith. He was like, that's a great idea. Just tell me what you want, and we'll look at how much time that will take and how much it'll cost. And it's as soon as you're responding with that kind of, built-in conversation, people again start to understand their roles and their expectations in those conversations. So we're kind of coming up on our QA start in a few minutes. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about calendars and time management. We talk about owning our calendars, and what does this mean? Well, I think to me this actually means that time is the most valuable asset that we have. No matter what, we get a finite amount, then we're dead, and then whatever happens after that is mystery. So every time we give a chunk of that away, basically what we're saying is this takes priority. You own that time. You've taken that time away from me. My personal take on this is that we have to think very carefully about when people are booking us in for meetings and they're phoning us, unexpectedly. We're getting to an age where now we can kind of choose our method of communication. And personally, I like to keep it all in, digital email format because there's, or in a database, because there's some way to track that. So I actually don't give out my cell number or my landline number unless it's something where they've explicitly asked, and then I say to people, okay, that's fantastic. Just please note, I use this line for emergencies, but if it's anything else, like, I'd really prefer to keep it in email format, because then we have something we can look back at. So right there, I'm trying to set that expectation that, this is the format that I'd like. And I do that the same way with booking my meetings and calendar dates. Like, I won't just say, oh, you want to have a meeting? Okay, let's have a meeting. It's like, why do we want the meeting? What are we going to do at the meeting? How important is that? Do I need to be at the meeting? So basically that I can carve out my time and my space and people can't take it away from me. But it's not about me. Carson, tell me, what are some ways that you save or kind of preserve time throughout your projects?
I'll preface my thoughts with a bit of a story, and I can't remember where I read this, but they went around and they talked to a bunch of like CEOs and managers and stuff, and they said, what are your priorities? What things do you actually need on a day-to-day basis to get done in order for your company to be successful? And so they listed those out, and then they did an audit of those people's calendars to see what they actually spent all their days doing. And I don't know if this is an exaggeration or not, but basically what the outcome was is they didn't spend any time focusing on their priorities. It was all the fires that get lit up around them and stuff. And so I think it's really important to take that back. I know certainly for me, I was living out of my inbox for so long where that latest email that came in, that's the one thing I dealt with, or all those little things you can just take care of as you went. And I recognize I need to stop. I need to identify on a weekly or daily basis what my priorities are and book them into my calendar. If you use a calendar that way, you can, I would actually block in 2 hours of my morning to say, I'm doing this, and all those other things can wait. Another thing I started doing more recently is using a personal Kanban board. So I say, I pick 3 things every day. These are the 3 things I need to get done. And I always have that in my face, and until those things are done, I can't pull anything else onto that list. So those are a couple things that I've been trying to do to bring back some of that prioritization.
Nice, those are pretty handy. Robert, do you have a few more things you want to add to that?
I would say along the lines of what Carson said, and it's something I learned at Happy Cog through Mark Hewitt and Greg Hoy. They were great with helping me to establish a routine with daily planning, and that was at the beginning of each morning, setting out that list, and actually, if I'm tracking my time across multiple projects, setting up timers ahead of time that are there waiting for me to say, okay, these are the most important things that I know that I have to get done. And then, just on a more general basis, I don't answer my phone. I let everything go to voicemail, and then I'll call people back at my convenience. They know how to reach me other ways. I can be found for impromptu chats if needed with project teams, but most everything either comes through email, Basecamp, or some sort of project collaboration tool. And then standing meetings. There are a lot of standing meetings on my calendar. It looks like a Tetris board, and that's great because we set up these regular project check-ins that are very informal, but recurring at the same time, same place, same day each week, and for different projects, and it's fantastic. That way we set an expectation that we're going to be available to respond to questions about the project in our Basecamp or other tool, and then we have our standing meetings, and then if we need to have other conversations, we'll set those up as needed. But it's not it's open door to a point, but it's not, call me up and monopolize my time for 3 hours, on a Friday afternoon.
I think that's fantastic. We're going to start with the Q&A in just a moment. I wanted to add that I think the biggest thing, as PMs, as people who manage projects, no matter what our role is, designer, developer, doesn't matter, we set the pace of the project. So if we have stuff coming into us and that client is demanding an answer, it's our choice if we respond to that question in an hour, a minute, or a day. Technically, you want to make sure that you've acknowledged that message, and you want to do that within a 24-hour period. But unless that message is urgent, if you're responding like that, you're telling your client, okay, I'm waiting for your next message, so this is the most important thing in my life right now, give me everything. So I think we set the pacing with the way that we respond to clients, the way that, even the pace in which we talk. and I'm a fast talker, so I should watch that. But making sure that we're communicating a very calm atmosphere so that we're actually kind of guiding the pace and the feel and the tone of that project. So that was one tip that I sort of learned over time that has really helped me, because when you're feeling good and you're acting confident and feeling in control, your clients are just like, oh, well, you obviously have this, and it's very Seinfeld. It just fits into place. So with that, I would love to open it up to our Q&A. Travis, give us a hand. Let us know if you're selecting questions for us so that we can answer. I know we've only got a few up, but please, audience, now's your chance. If you have any questions about the role of project managers or any other questions related to our digital industry, let us know, and we will start to answer those. All right, so our first question has come in from Joe. Joe's asking, as a freelancer or a remote digital project manager, how do you deal with working with new teams and specifically new processes? That is an important question. So, Jolly, is that okay, Robert? I'll throw that to you since you do a lot of remote work.
So yeah, that's fine. A lot of times, people when they're connecting with me, with their teams, they have a process that they've used or that they've thought that they were going to use for a specific project, but they want my input on that. Now, it's not that I have carte blanche to just change the way everybody does their work and when they do it, but it's it's more about giving input and saying, hey, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? So I like to go in and if I can meet with the teams in person, that's great, but if not, just talking with everybody individually and then collectively as a group about the project, about their roles, and understanding how they like to work and what they're going to do on the project really helps to, sorry, I have a baby here that just woke up from his nap. My wife has him at the moment, so all is well. But just basically understanding how their process flow works, and maybe introducing some new ideas about where things can be either tightened up or improved in some way. And so just adding some value, but also being flexible enough to understand that it's not always kind of my way or the highway, if that makes sense. So I hope that helped, Joe. It's certainly something that I try to take a little bit of time to ground myself in what's going on and understand the needs of the project before coming up with any new suggestions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a solid answer. And Carson, I was going to ask you too, because you're sort of transitioning now into a little bit more of a remote role. What are some of the, you had to go to the office the other day. Office, what is that? What is the place where you buy office things?
Office supply store, Staples?
Yes, Staples. You had to go to get, a whole office set up in place. And I was kind of curious, like, what are the things on your mind right now as you're transitioning into this?
I think, I'm going from not just, doing project management remotely, but just working remotely in general. So it's a transition from showing up at the office and having all your stuff there to setting up something in your home. And I do work from home as opposed to coffee shops and that sort of thing. So for me, more so than the equipment, it was the space itself. I needed to have a place that not only was separate from everything else that's going on, on the personal side of my life, somewhere where I can shut the door and say, I'm at work now, and everything else is separate. But I also needed to find a place that felt where I could be productive. And I think that was a huge factor for me. It wasn't until I set up my whole office here that I felt like, this is somewhere I want to work. If I'm sitting on the couch or at a kitchen table, you're not in the same mind space. So having this place that feels like work, that was huge for me.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thanks. All right, so we have our next question, and that's from Travis Bellinghausen, and that is, how do you steer a client who wants a new web presence for a service or offering, but does not or is not willing to develop a strategy to promote it in any way? Ironically, I think this is something we were just talking about before the call. So did either of you guys want to jump in on that one?
Feels like a Robert thing, but I just think, we can use our experience from past projects to be able to tell a client, like, without doing this initial upfront work where, well, whether it's upfront in terms of strategy or at the end in terms of promotion, without tying all those pieces together, we're basically asking to create a project that's going to fail.
Absolutely. I don't know. I'll let you, Robert. I'll let you jump into. But I was just going to say, like, my approach again. I might be a little bit more direct, and other people you might not want to do this. But I would actually say to a client, "Are you okay if this project fails?" Because essentially, what you're saying to me right now is that you're not willing to put the time and the attention in to form the plan. And if you don't do that, it's a risk that will happen. So if you're okay with that, and this doesn't have to succeed, then yes, let's try to just go willy-nilly. But it's maybe a little bit of a leading question. So what about you, Robert?
Yeah, so I was just asked by a client if the team could redesign a certain section for their long established website. And they've got a nice web presence. They've got a lot of content. And my question back to her was, how does this serve your organization's needs, and how does it, more importantly, serve your end user needs? Like, do you understand why you're doing this? I mean, I think you have some ideas, but do you have a strategy around why you want to do this work? And that doesn't really answer the promotion question necessarily, but in a way, understanding who your audience is and why you're doing something, and if it's sustainable, and if it's something that people actually want, and if it can be measured, is something that that's much more valuable to ask up front before just racing down the path of, oh yeah, that's going to cost you, $18 to do, and it's going to take 2 hours. That makes our time at $9 an hour, by the way. So that's a pretty good upgrade for us, right?
That's a good skill as a project manager for sure. All right, so I think we have room for one, maybe two more questions. Let's see, what is our next question coming up, Travis? Okay, so we have one by Anders. I know Anders. You're awesome. Thanks for being here today. So Anders writes today, daily stand-ups can free up the rest of your day, but constant communication lets you be more agile hour to hour. So if you were to choose a strategy for a small multidisciplinary team, what would you bank on? Good question. How about Carson? Do you want to speak to that a little?
So that's daily stand-up versus just ongoing conversation?
Yeah, I think like having, collaborative environment throughout the day, maybe where you're not necessarily working side by side. Hopefully that's right, Anders. If not, let us know.
I think I do like the daily stand-up idea. I can understand where maybe it gets maybe monotonous for some people if you're not achieving the goals you're hoping for out of it. But at the same time, that ongoing collaboration, it depends on the kind of work you're doing, I think. If you're trying to do some heads-down programming work, having those interruptions are a huge time suck on that, and we have to be really careful of that. Depends on what stage, I think, of the project you're in. If you're in the development stage, you want to give those people the time to just devote to doing their work. If you're in discovery, it makes a lot more sense to be a lot more collaborative and have those conversations ongoing so that you're checking yourself and saying, well, are we on the right track? Do we need to adjust this a little bit? So I'm a fan of both, but it depends on the circumstance of that project.
Absolutely. I know for me, I've done iChat where you have it set to, don't disturb between X and X. If you can get a 3-hour limit of productivity in, you're going to be laughing, and you can kind of set your communication outside of that. Robert, any quick additions? We got a couple minutes before we wrap up.
I think preference of the team that's working on that work is definitely something that I would defer to in a way. I do worry about that fine line between too many interruptions and not, but if there could be scheduled periods where developers can work actively together, or designers and developers can work actively together, almost like pair programming, but maybe remote. I think that's an interesting concept and something that we've experimented with over at EngineWorks as well.
Yeah.
So it's definitely an experiment worth taking, if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're coming up on 2 minutes. We want to log off on time today. So I'm not sure if we'll have time for the next question. Let me just read through it really quickly. Best practices. It is a more in-depth question, so it might be something that we can kind of come back to, Joe, but I really, really appreciate you submitting that one. So on behalf of Louder Than 10 and both Carson and Robert, I'm so happy you guys could join us today. It's our first go, so I appreciate you hanging with us. If there's any feedback that you have as far as you want, more specific information or case studies, like we'd love to be able to do that. So I have a few things that I wanted to mention. Now, Robert, if people want to find you, where can we find you?
Hopefully at the beach, but I'm on Twitter. I am Jolly. Forgive any kind of crazy tweets you see there. Jollypm.com is my website. There's not a lot of content, so I can guarantee that you'll be happy with the amount of time that you have to spend there.
Right.
So yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm also out and about. I'll be going to some conferences and organizing some stuff around here since I moved to Florida. So hopefully I'll get the chance to see you in person.
Yeah. Carson, where can we find you?
I'm on Twitter at Carson Pierce, which same caveat as Robert. There's some crazy stuff in there, so I apologize in advance.
We're just human beings.
Yes. Otherwise, my email is carson@carsonpierce.com, keeping it really simple. And then I've got some stuff going on at the louderthan10.com website.
That's right.
And speaking this October at the Digital PM Conference or Digital PM Summit in Austin. And I've got a really great co-presenter with me for that one. So,
fantastic. Yes, I think I might have heard of her actually. So come to the DPM Summit in October from the 6th to the 7th in Austin. If you get a chance, it's fantastic. Check out dpm2014.com. Also, quick reminder, Louder Than 10 is actually going to be opening up submissions for writing. So if you think you're funny and you got something to say, we want to hear about it. We'll let you know if you want to offer any information about like Old Dutch Crunchies, for example, my favorite. So you'll be able to check this recording out live, or sorry, not live, on YouTube on our channel, and you can also check out the hashtag LT10 and follow us at Louder Than 10. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, please follow up. But we're going to be doing more of these. Next month, I'm going to be chatting with Brett Harned from Happy Cog as well. So take it easy, guys. Have a good one, and we will see you soon. Bye.